Hello and welcome. In a continent where migration has gone transatlantic and corruption is now transgenerational, terrorism remains a global phenomenon and a source of transnational concern. Regardless, Africa remains a region where the hope of the future looks brighter than the glory of the past. This is Africa This Week, and I'm your guide, Fadeshala Shotingwa. We start off the day with earlier in the week. Welcome on board. The 29th Ordinary Session of the African Union, the AU Summit, kicked off on Monday at the headquarters of the continental body in Ethiopia's capital, Addis Ababa. The summit, which ran under the theme Harnessing the Demographic Dividend through Investment in the Youth, was expected to make deliberations on several key issues that include AU financing and institutional reform. The two-day summit was also expected to tackle issues regarding peace and security on the continent. Political instability in countries like South Sudan, Somalia, Libya, the Central African Republic and the DR Congo also raised concerns. In other developments, Zimbabwean President Robert Mugabe handed over a check for $1 million to the AU after he and his supporters sold hundreds of cattle in support of the continental body. Mugabe said his initial pledge of 300 cattle to the bloc 2 years ago had caught on amongst his party members and people. It was also in the news on Monday that former Nigerian Commissioner of Public Complaints, Maitama Sule, had passed on. He was ill and died in a hospital in Cairo, Egypt. Maitama Sule was considered one of Nigeria's best orators and was first a federal commissioner in 1976. 3 years later, he was a presidential candidate but lost to Shehu Shagari. Nonetheless, he was appointed Nigeria's representative to the United Nations, where he became the chairman of the UN Special Committee Against Apartheid. And at least one soldier and several Boko Haram fighters were killed in two battles between the insurgents and the Nigerian army on Tuesday. One of the attacks happened while the insurgents attempted to attack the 81 Division Task Force Battalion's location at Gulumbagana in Bama local government area. The army spokesperson, Sani Usman, said soldiers repelled and killed suspected mercenary fighters of Boko Haram who launched the two attacks on military locations but did not give details on their nationalities. Sani Usman also said the mercenaries killed by troops were those fighting on the side of Mama Nur faction of the Boko Haram. On Wednesday, the Kenyan President Uhuru Kenyatta announced he would not take part in the two planned televised debates with his main rival, Raila Odinga, ahead of the August the 8th election. The first of the debates, organized by a consortium of Kenyan media, was scheduled for Monday, the 11th of July, and the second on July the 24th. Kenyatta said he will not participate in the presidential debates, citing insufficient consultation and format issues. Kenyatta and Odinga are the only two candidates with more than 5% in recent opinion polls and were meant to go head-to-head. Kenya held its first ever televised presidential debate in 2013, including both Kenyatta and Odinga. Afterwards, Kenyatta complained that he had been unfairly targeted by moderators. The vote comes a decade after the worst electoral violence in Kenyan history, when over 1,000 people were killed in a politically motivated ethnic violence. On Thursday, Libya's eastern commander, Khalifa Haftar, said his forces had taken full control of Benghazi from rival armed groups. The three-year campaign to retake Benghazi has been part of a broader conflict since Libya slipped into chaos after the 2011 fall of Muammar Gaddafi. Victory would mark a major advance for Haftar, the former Gaddafi ally, who had slowly gained ground in eastern and southern Libya. This is in defiance of a UN-backed government in the capital Tripoli, which is struggling to extend its influence. The Medical Women Association of Nigeria made the news on Friday after urging the government to pay attention to medical research and turn them into functional policy.
Nigeria has one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. Members of the Medical Women Association Lagos chapter say the high indices can be reduced if government will encourage research and use the findings in drawing up the nation's prevention strategy.
We have tried to implore government to understand the importance of using research material for national development. But unfortunately, that is yet to materialize sufficiently. Lagos State is trying, but I'm not sure that can be said of the national, because most of maternal mortality occur in first-time mothers. And who knows when a girl will be a first-time mother? You don't know. So the education should start when these girls are in school, and because as soon as they leave school, you don't know when they will become mother.
Currently and recently, we have noticed that cancers is on the increase. So we concentrate on female cancers, specifically breast and cervical cancer. We have done a lot of screening with religious organizations, in local government areas, and in any particular place where we find women.
Despite the success and hindrances they have recorded, the female doctors say they are determined to continue to create awareness and assist where necessary to improve the health of women and children in Lagos.
We need to build up our economy, and the base for building up this economy lies on the shoulders of women. And our women have to be healthy for us to build up a healthy economy. So we have done extremely well in improving the health of women in Lagos State.
First of all, our main challenge is resources. We were one of the pioneers of what we call the VIA, which is visual inspection using acetic acid for cervical cancer. We have a center where we were promoting pap smear, for women. However, just even trying to get people to come and do the pap smear at a very low cost was a challenge.
The Medical Women Association of Nigeria Lagos chapter was established in 1977. Health critics hope it will not take another 40 years before we can see a significant improvement in the health of women in the state. Vivian Irike, TVC News.
Still in Nigeria, 14 resident electoral commissioners were sworn in by the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, on Friday. They were charged to ensure credibility and transparency in dealing with all actors in the electoral process.
I solemnly swear I will be faithful.
The new resident electoral commissioners have been charged by the INEC boss to ensure credible polls and to maintain a fine line of interaction between them and all actors in the election process, in accordance with their oath of office.
INEC has no candidate in any election. You must demonstrate transparency, impartiality, courage, and balanced interaction with the stakeholders. Good elections begin from our credibility as election managers. In truth, or in turn rather, our credibility depends on the openness and transparency of our processes.
The election management body also assured Nigerians of its intense preparation for the 2019 general election. It promised that there will be a huge difference as a result of the qualified recs being deployed.
Your appointment is coming barely 19 months to the next general election. Our commitment to Nigeria is to make the 2019 election better than previous elections, and this is achievable. Outcome of elections must be determined solely by the votes cast by eligible citizens at the polls and nothing else.
I would like to pledge the institution of the highest level of integrity in the discharge of our statutory responsibilities.
With the assurances that any INEC official found wanting in election irregularities will be prosecuted, the Electoral Authority says it is set to hold a retreat for the new regs. These 14 resident electoral commissioners are set to be dispatched to 14 states across the country by the INEC chairman. Now, this is just a list out of the 27 reg nominees sent to the Senate by President Muhammadu Buhari in March. 13 of those nominees have not scaled through, and they are now awaiting confirmation by the Senate. Sumner Sambu, TVC News, Abuja.
And with that, we have come to the end of Earlier in the Week. Up next is Digging Deep, and that will be after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Africa This Week. From the joy that thrilled independence to the point it began to fall apart, it is now 50 years after Nigeria plunged into a civil war which claimed more than 1 million lives in a desperate attempt to keep the nation united. The conflict, later tagged No Victor, No Vanquished, lasted 924 days, leaving behind scars of war, elements of discontent, side effects of corruption, and present-day agitations for restructuring. Joining me in the studio to dig deep on Africa This Week is Liboros Oshoma, lawyer and political analyst. Welcome to the program.
My pleasure.
Well, I'm not sure if you witnessed the war, but from what you know, do you think it was a path eventually worth taking in the first place?
Not at all. Like Alabi Sama said in his book, The Tragedy of Victory, if you look at events after the war till date, even those that partook, in the war, participated in the war, people like retired General Alabi Sama, looking back at what they fought for, and what is obvious today, you just ask yourself, was it worth it? And his conclusion was, it wasn't worth it, because almost everything they fought for, are with us today and even worse off. And so, and then that's why for those that are still drumming, or calling for war, there's need for them to exercise restraint and then, tell them that, look, you need to have the benefit of history for you to actually know where you're going to. If you don't have the benefits of, that's why books are there. If you don't have the benefit of history, go ask people, who participated until date. We're all casualties. Even those, that's why it was tagged No Victor, No Vanquished.
No Vanquished.
Because it's not just those that went to war that were casualties. It's not just those that died, like Professor Wole Soyinka said. Everybody, we're all casualties, including people that lost businesses and all of that.
Well, it's 50 years after the Civil War. How well has Nigeria fared as a nation?
Not just to Nigeria. If you look at Africa as a whole, you see one key factor that is missing: leadership. A lot of people had said, look, Africa is blessed, with great potentials, natural resources, human resources. But one problem bedeviling Africa is leadership. From Kenya to Congo, to Egypt, to Nigeria. And so this attitude of wanting to stay put, and like Obasanjo also referred to in his book, My Watch, the tendency for African leaders to see themselves as a monarch, not tenured monarch now, but monarch, like he said, some leaders describe his stepping down in 1979, as, look, don't embrace this Western democracy hook, line, and sinker. In Africa, we operate monarchical system. And so you also find out that monarchical system, the tendency to want to grab, and there is no equity.
Grab and keep.
Yes. There is no equity, there is no fairness, and so hard work is not encouraged. mostly I'm talking about Nigeria now, ditto most part of Africa. And that's why the likes of Nelson Mandela's style of leadership was alien to Africa, and that's why he's celebrated worldwide. And so that's why you find out that all of the indices, all of the factors that culminated into the war, the civil war in Nigeria 50 years ago, are even worse off today. Is it tribalism? Is it nepotism? Is it corruption? Is it inequality? And so it's until you address all of these problems, it is enough to ask for restructuring. But we need to also understand what we are restructuring. We first and foremost need to restructure the mindset of the average African before, but otherwise you restructure the political structure, the geographical structure, leaving out the mindset and the economic restructuring.
Indeed, that's what former President Olusegun Obasanjo said. But from legal perspectives now, what are your thoughts on the growing calls for restructuring? Yes,
there's, when we, it's easy for Nigerians to bandy words, restructuring, transformation, change, they are slogans.
Do we all understand these words?
No. You'll find out that the proponents of restructuring, they probably have a different meaning to the meaning that the average man on the street will attach to that word restructuring. That's why the first step should be everybody, or 90% or 80% maximum, should be on the same page on what should be the restructuring that you're talking about. And so once the people are on the same page, then you can now begin to discuss, okay, how do we achieve, these demands? But as you speak now, a lot of people are not on the same page, and that's why it will be difficult. We have called for sovereign national conference, political conference, and all kinds of conferences. At every turn, there are such conferences, but it still do not address the major problem, because the mindset, of the leaders had been the same. It kept deteriorating from the 60s down to 2007.
Is it that it doesn't address, or that these reports are not implemented?
What it should, Nigeria, it's a beautiful country with diversity.
No doubt.
But rather than harness those diversity, our brand of politics keep dividing us, day in, day out. And that's why, because 2 kilometers in some quarters, forget the fact that once we are Yorubas, we are Hausas, we are North, we are South, 2 kilometers, in certain areas is a different language. And with the brand of politics that we pursue now, you find that everybody is agitating for its own. We want to maintain ours. We want to be able to, harness that which God has placed, on us. And so those are some of the restructuring that people are talking about. But will it be physically possible for every small unit, no matter how minute, to be able to harness without somebody in the form of a local government coming to lord over how it should be? But if there is fairness, if there is equity, nobody will really bother where the leader comes from, where your governor comes from, provided the basic necessities, the basic provisions, the basic infrastructures are there. But as we speak, why there's so much agitation? Because the belief is that the moment you're there, you represent your people. You don't represent the larger interest. But even in the North, it is when there is a common enemy that you see a united North. But the moment that common enemy is gone, that's where you know that there's Fufude, there's Hausa, there's, all those small tribes. The same thing everywhere. So we need to, as leaders, it shouldn't be about, just the call for restructuring. It should be about the cause first and foremost for equity and fairness. The call also to see, the units as part of a whole. And then, no matter where you find yourself, take steps to developing those areas, and not, it must be where I'm from. That's one big problem that, the state of origin, where are you from? You see a Nigerian, where are you from? Yeah. And you've lived in Lagos all your life.
It should be Nigeria first.
You should be Nigeria first. And yet you still cannot be a Lagosian. You lived in Kano all your life, yet you still cannot claim, citizen of Kano, you're first and foremost asked where you're from. And meanwhile, you get back to where you're from, you are seen as an outsider because you don't live within. And so it gets to a point you are a man without identity. You know, so these are some of the problems, and leaders know, and so they latch on this. So for there to be fairness, we need to remove these hurdles and bottleneck to the so-called restructuring.
Well, it's 50 years gone now. What lessons do you think Nigeria should learn from the Civil War? The
lessons are lessons that we should learn are lessons that led to the Second World War. After the First World War, Germans were treated as second-class citizens. And so a new crop of Germans came up who did not witness the First World War. And so they needed to make a statement to show that, look, we are equal in this, this partnership. And so that led to the Second World War. And at the end of the day, even though they were, given their place, in the society, but it was avoidable. And so these are lessons that Nigerians should learn. Now you have crops of leaders, of youths, who did not witness the war. No matter the preaching that you preach to them, all they want to see is fairness, equality. And so if we begin to take steps to address those inequalities, not just enough to say we will restructure. Let us begin to restructure the mindset by addressing those inequalities to balance, the structure. And then they would, or what the average man on the street will call, sense of belonging. Well, indeed, so Nigerian youth should go back and read books on their history. Yes. Liberos Oshoma, lawyer and political analyst, many thanks for being with me. Always my pleasure. Well, it's 50 years after a civil war that comes both with a sense of history and a need to reflect on the sacrifice that has kept the nation united and the consequence of repeating mistakes of the past. Nigeria finds itself at crossroads with emerging realities where it would take more than just restructuring to heal the wounds of war and build a solid foundation for peaceful coexistence. I have been your guide, Fadishola Shotingwa. Many thanks for watching and bye for now.